Russia isn't winning the war, but it wants the world to think that it is, and it's resorting to increasingly desperate measures to do so. Only days ago, the Kremlin decided to stage a major battlefield victory, releasing fabricated footage and publishing false claims about Russian troops invading a key piece of Ukrainian territory. There was just one little problem. Ukraine also had some footage to share, and it instantly exposed Putin's lies, debunked the Kremlin's claims, and humiliated the Russian army all in one fell swoop. The story shows just how ridiculous Russia is becoming in its attempts to project power and convince its own people, and the world at large, that it's on the path to victory. It all started on October 22nd when the Russian-installed head of the occupied Kherson region, Vladimir Saldo, published some footage online. The video, which had a dramatic musical backing track, consisted of a series of clips, some filmed on the ground and others on the water or in the air. They showed Russian troops planning tactics, riding aboard inflatable boats, wading through water, and engaging in firefights on the ground, before one soldier plants a flag among a pile of rubble. According to Saldo, this was all happening on Karantin Island, a small landmass that sits in the Dnipro River just southwest of Kherson City. The regional governor made multiple big claims, painting the picture of a huge Russian victory in the area. He said that Russian reconnaissance and airborne units had successfully crossed the river, fought off Ukrainian counterattacks, secured a foothold, and were already in the process of mining access routes and organizing logistics for a sustained presence on the island, presumably leading up to a push further north into Kherson City itself. Various Russian military bloggers came out with similar claims online, celebrating the efforts of Russian drone operators of the 31st VDV Brigade after they allegedly established air superiority in the area. Artillery units of the 18th Combined Arms Army were also singled out for praise after reportedly striking Ukrainian targets on the island and nearby bridges. One military blogger also claimed that Russian saboteurs were already getting ready to hunt down the remaining Ukrainian forces on the northeastern part of the island. Meanwhile, Russia's state-owned news agencies like TASS started sharing their own reports of the country's latest supposed victory. The TASS report claimed that Ukrainian forces had been taken by surprise by a Russian attack on the island, and that Russian forces quickly seized control of key facilities, even including a quote from a recon platoon commander. The mission was challenging, crossing the water under potential fire and establishing a foothold for further advances. Our reconnaissance in force revealed that the enemy did not expect an attack at this particular location. Our troops responded quickly and effectively. Once landed, we immediately took control of the island's key facilities. Additional news reports included quotes from Governor Saldo, who proudly proclaimed, "Karantin Island is a combat zone controlled by the Russian Dnipro Group, although enemy fighters are still hiding in residential and industrial buildings on its territory." Saldo went on to claim that Russian forces were actively identifying and taking out Ukrainian troops and targets across the island, before claiming that the military command is currently deciding what role to assign to the island in the liberation of Kherson based on the situation. Between the dramatic footage shared online and the quotes provided by those involved, the story almost sounds like a scene from a military movie or video game, with Russian forces rolling into the area, wiping out every enemy in sight, and quickly asserting control. And just like plenty of movies and games, the whole thing was completely made up. It didn't happen, and Ukraine has the evidence to prove it. Only a day after Saldo's bold claims and carefully edited footage, on October 23rd, a Ukrainian brigade debunked the entire story. The 34th Separate Coastal Defense Brigade shared a geolocated video showing their troops marching freely and safely across the island, completely disproving the Kremlin's claims that the area was under Russian control or that there were even any live firefights ongoing. Members of the brigade stated that the area and the surrounding areas around Kherson City are, in a word, silent, and shared this caption along with their video. In the propaganda telegram channels of the occupiers, Kherson is already captured, and Russian infantry allegedly walks on the right bank. On the real footage of the micro-district of the island and the village of Sadova, silence, peace, and absence of any opponent. The 34th Separate Brigade of the Coast Defense Marine Corps 30 keep their positions firmly and continuously controls the Dnipro coastline. Antonivka, Sadova, and Kherson are under our watchful eye. All attempts of the enemy to approach the river stop immediately. The enemy has no chance of crossing or milling on the right bank. Their successes exist only on the internet, not in reality. 34th Brigade holding Kherson. The coast is under our control. We're in positions and we're staying here. The same day, spokesman for the Defense Forces of the south of Ukraine, Vladislav Voloshin, also shared a video of himself filmed on Karantin Island. In the clip, Voloshin sings and dances happily while completely refuting the Russian version of events. Ukraine's video evidence is irrefutable, and various trusted sources soon analyzed the available data and came to the same clear conclusion: Russia had invented the story. As the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, puts it, the Kremlin is attempting to falsely portray Russian forces as having established a bridgehead in the west right bank Kherson Oblast, a new Russian cognitive warfare effort against Ukraine and its partners. Available evidence continues to indicate that Russian forces have not established a bridgehead or begun an offensive in the West Bank Kherson Oblast. The Institute also refuted other claims from Russian military bloggers, including one who said that Russian troops had managed to push Ukrainian forces out of Sadova and carried out sabotage near Antonivka, which are both situated a short distance east of Kherson City. Again, the ISW said no evidence existed to prove these claims. Having been caught red-handed making up stories about its soldiers, Russian media soon attempted to cover their tracks. TASS, for example, retracted a news article about Russian forces capturing the Karantin Island. The ISW then began to dig deeper, looking at some of the possible motives that Russia might have to indulge in these kinds of falsehoods and fabrications to begin with. Russia is likely conducting a cognitive warfare effort to portray limited Russian sabotage and reconnaissance operations in the Kherson district as the start of a dedicated Russian offensive to cross the Dnipro River and recapture Kherson City and Oblast. The Kremlin likely intends to convince the West, European Union or EU, and Ukraine that a Russian victory is inevitable, so that Ukraine should submit to Russia's demands to cede territory, and that allies should stop supporting Ukraine. ISW continues to assess that this Russian cognitive warfare effort is incompatible with any claim that Russia is willing to make territorial concessions in southern Ukraine. There are three big lessons we can learn from this. First, as stated earlier on, it's a clear sign of Russian desperation. A country that is winning a war, taking over territory, and making progress on the battlefield should have more than enough real stories and reports of success to share. It should have no need to make up or exaggerate claims about its forces' movements on the ground. The very fact that Russia is having to come up with these crazy concocted tales just shows the remarkably weak position it finds itself in today. Nobody predicted this back when the war began. Many analysts expected that Russia may face some challenges and resistance from Ukraine, but nobody would have guessed that nearly 4 years on, the Kremlin would be reduced to inventing ridiculously made-up stories to make itself out to appear stronger and more successful than it really is. We know that mistruth and propaganda are some of Vladimir Putin's favorite weapons. However, claiming to have taken over a tiny island and actually taking the time to stage a video to try to prove it is a whole new low, even for him. That leads us to the second big lesson we can learn from this. As the ISW notes, the Kremlin is willing to do whatever it takes to convince countries of the Western world, like the United States and the nations of the European Union, that it's winning the war. It wants to create and nurture the narrative that its mighty war machine is rampaging to victory, that its forces are capturing valuable ground day in, day out, and that it's only a matter of time until Ukraine's final defensive lines crumble and the Russian flag rises over Kyiv. In reality, none of that is true, and there are reams of evidence to back that up. In almost 4 years, for example, Russia has gained ground, but its troops are making gains at a remarkably slow pace in many regions. Most key territories, towns, and cities are still in Ukraine's hands, like Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, and Russia's total losses are catastrophic, with more than 1 million soldiers killed or wounded, and staggering numbers of tanks, armored vehicles, aircraft, naval vessels, radars, and air defenses either damaged or destroyed entirely. Going off current data, open source intelligence, and the way the war has gone so far, many experts believe it would take several more years just for Russia to take full control of the 4 regions it originally set out to seize: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, and a full conquest of Ukraine would take many more decades or potentially another century. Those are the facts that the Kremlin does not want to hear, and it doesn't want the wider world to hear them either. It can't erase the reality of the situation, but it can attempt to cover it up, muddying the waters with mistruths of its own imagining, which is exactly what we've seen happen here. Fortunately, in this case, Ukraine was very quickly and efficiently able to refute Russia's reports with evidence of its own. But this won't be the last time that the Kremlin tries something like this. And if Russia releases enough false reports and exaggerated claims, some of them may eventually start to stick. And that has the power to influence opinions and change people's minds about what is happening in the war. That's why it's vital for Ukraine and its allies to continue calling out Russia's lies, to disprove its fake statements and refute its propaganda at every opportunity. Because no matter what Russia says or claims, the only thing that really matters is the truth. And the truth is that Russia is as far away from victory today as it was 3.5 years ago. It's not making the significant gains it needs, it's not breaking through Ukraine's defensive lines, and it's not in the ascendancy in any way, shape or form. That's exactly what Jack Keane, a retired US general, argued in a recent opinion piece for the New York Times, published on October 24th, just a couple of days after the Kremlin's latest propaganda piece. According to Keane, who is also the chair of the Institute for the Study of War, despite battling for almost 4 years in Ukraine, Russia is losing in every metric that matters. Its casualty rates are colossal, its economic conditions are worsening by the day, and its territorial gains are both slow and enormously costly. As Keane writes, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin claims that victory in Ukraine is inevitable and rejects any peace deal that doesn't give him total control of the eastern part of the country, the Donbass. Don't believe it, Russia is not winning this war. Russia has failed to conquer a smaller and poorer adversary despite nearly 4 years of campaigning. Its military is severely underperforming, and Ukraine's defenses have slowed Russia's rate of advance to a literal foot pace. Russia has seized 0.6% of Ukraine this year and has lost 1,000 soldiers per day doing it. The ISW head goes on to note that Russia has not captured an oblast capital city since March 2022, that its forces are fighting for crater-filled fields and abandoned towns, suffering extravagant and unsustainable losses along the way. He adds that the only reason Russia is still even able to fight at this point is thanks to the small number of allies it still has left, naming China, North Korea, and Iran in particular. Keane then urges Americans not to fall for Putin's lies before reeling off a long and powerful list of facts and statistics that paint the real picture of this war. He notes, for example, how Ukraine's drones have forced Russia to almost abandon all hope of using tanks and mechanized vehicles in the war at this stage. Instead, Russian troops are now most commonly seen either marching on foot in small squadrons of 3 to 5 soldiers at a time, or riding simple civilian vehicles like jeeps and motorbikes. As Keane says, many of these soldiers die in huge numbers for only the tiniest amounts of ground, and without armor to back them up, Russian troops are going to continue to either be wounded or killed, with little hope of taking the sizable chunks of territory they need to push on towards more important logistics hubs and strategic locations. Keane also points out that according to the ISW's assessments, Russia gained just 1,420 square kilometers, 550 square miles, since July 1st of this year, which is a rate of around 13.5 square miles, just over 5 square miles, a day. That's way below expectations for a force of Russia's size, and any modern, mechanized army facing off against a much smaller force should be gaining ground in significantly larger quantities. As mentioned earlier, if Russia continues to take territory this slowly, it will be years until it can even fully capture the Donbass region, let alone other parts of Ukraine. And the price that Russia is paying for its gains is astonishing. As Keane puts it, Russian forces averaged roughly 71 casualties per square kilometer gained in May 2025, 70 casualties per square kilometer in June 2025, 75 casualties per square kilometer in July 2025, and 68 casualties per square kilometer in August. These are horrifying numbers. Horrifying is certainly an appropriate adjective for the Kremlin's casualty rate. The fact that the country's commanders are so willing to continue to throw their troops into the firing line also shows how little regard they have for human life. Death and injury are inevitable in war, of course, but many military forces at least make attempts to limit the amount of casualties they suffer. Russia, however, appears to have absolutely no regard for those that enlist in its army. Each troop is treated as little more than a piece of meat, thrown to his death and replaced by another unfortunate soul the following week. Keane goes on to highlight the fact that Russia's biggest success of 2025 was when it recaptured its own territory, the Kursk region, which had been partly taken over by Ukrainian forces in 2024. Even then, Russia had to rely on outside help, calling in 10,000 North Korean soldiers for support to push the Ukrainian invaders back, in a move that Keane labels an embarrassment for Russia. Finally, the former four-star general writes about perhaps the biggest issue facing Russia right now, its economic collapse, which Keane believes may make it harder for the Kremlin to recruit the huge numbers of troops it needs to counterbalance its massive losses. Until now, Putin has been able to sustain this war because of large-scale recruitment with financial incentives. But there are signs that the system is fraying. Leaked Russian government documents indicate that the country has suffered, on average, 35,000 casualties per month from January to September 2025. Yet it is cutting down on one-time signing bonuses for new military recruits. Russia may need to switch to politically unpopular compulsory mobilization of reservists, which would increase internal dissent and threaten Putin's leadership. It's certainly possible that mobilization may be on Putin's mind, especially as Russia recently announced a new draft law amendment, according to which the country's estimated 2 million military reservists can now be called upon to defend Russian infrastructure from Ukrainian attacks. Some analysts, including those at ISW, believe that this may be the first step in a larger plan to mobilize hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of additional active-duty soldiers to send to Ukraine. Given the fact that Russia is in dire economic straits, mobilization may be the only option left, as the country is inevitably going to struggle to find the funds it needs to keep paying huge signing bonuses, soldier salaries, and compensation payouts to the families of those that are killed on the front lines. As Keane notes, the liquidity of Russia's National Wealth Fund has dropped to approximately $50 billion in October 2025, representing a decrease of over 55% compared to its pre-war total of $113 billion. The country is now also facing extremely high inflation and skyrocketing interest rates, coupled with increasingly dramatic effects of a potentially fatal fuel crisis, with gasoline shortages estimated anywhere from 13 to 20% of demand, thanks to Ukraine's effective drone attacks on oil refineries and other fuel-related infrastructure across Russia's regions and occupied territories. The fact that US President Donald Trump recently imposed more severe sanctions on Russian oil companies has only made the situation worse for Putin and his Kremlin cohorts. That may explain why Russia is resorting to such drastic and ludicrous tactics, falsifying battlefield victories to pretend to its own population and the wider world that everything is fine and is still on the road to some sort of glorious victory. As Keane notes, the Kremlin also strives to spread its lies online to people across the planet. It floods social media with bots and paid commentators to push a false narrative. They play up minuscule battlefield advances as significant wins to manipulate our perception of the facts. But the world is waking up. Even in Russia, more and more people are opening their eyes, seeing through the lies, and realizing that this war was the biggest mistake their government ever made. The Kremlin's tactics are failing, both on the battlefield and beyond. No matter how many lies it creates and spreads, it will never be enough to cover up or cancel out the truth of what is really happening in this war. You can get a deeper look at the economic turmoil facing the Kremlin today in this video, which explores how Western sanctions, reckless spending, and other factors have all added up to create a perfect storm of chaos. Alternatively, check out this video for proof that Ukraine, not Russia, is actually in the ascendancy and on track to potentially recapture every square mile of land the Kremlin tried to steal from it. Remember to subscribe to our channel too for more in-depth video insights and breaking news reports from the Russia-Ukraine war and other important conflicts around the world. And thank you as always for watching.